Alrighty then. Well, for my last drawing in this series, I really wanted to do a little bit of that turning and tumbling and whatnot. And I wanted to make, perfect cubes and all that kind of good stuff. So I came up with this little drawing right here. And, just like all the other lessons, I'll kind of walk you through it. And hopefully you can take the knowledge that I'm giving you now and just use it on your own. And see once again with this drawing how the perspective, little sort of perspective puzzles, are just a means to an end. They're just going to help you to make, more advanced drawings and create, different compositions. In fact, let me kind of show you something. So, like with all the drawings, it started off with a really rough sketch right here. And you can see that my first blocks that I had drawn, they look okay, but they were just kind of intuitive, and maybe my intuitive is better than other people's intuitive just because I'm doing this stuff so much, right? But they weren't great, right? But that's okay because you got to just get your ideas down on paper. And I don't know if you can see all the erasing that went on with this. I mean, just ridiculous amounts, right? So I've got my idea down, kind of what it's going to be like. And so I darkened in and erased a lot of the extra gobbledygook, and I made a second drawing from that. Okay, and this one here is where I worked out all the perspective and got it nailed down, just right, just right. And so from there, I was able to then trace it onto a fresh piece of paper, kind of like this right here. I don't know if you're even going to be able to see that one. And create this drawing right here, right? The finished drawing. Nice and clean and ready to rock and roll, right? And nobody will know all the work that went into making it, but that's okay. We will, right? And if you're watching this video, you're a wizard. So we don't have to go over the basics. Let's just kind of show you how it was done. Okay. Well, I made, a second underdrawing. And so that's the one that we'll work on now. One of the first things that you'll notice is that the first drawing that I made, the guy was just sort of straight on. And so one of the things that I did is when I was going over and working it out, is I decided to take and tilt my drawing this way to get all the perspective on the table and the background and everything underneath. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So here I've got my paper right here, and all I have to do is decide, well, okay, I'm going to have my vanishing point come right here. This, I know you probably can't see it really well, but this is the guy right here. In fact, why don't I just do this? I'm going to draw out the guy real quick, and that way, because he's really the anchor, right? That's the focal point of our composition. So I'm going to draw him real quick. Okay, so now that we've got him out of the way, let's put a dot right, bam, between the eyes, because that is the focal point of this whole drawing, right? So now that we've got our focal point, let's just go ahead and turn them this way a little bit, and that way I can draw all my straight horizontal lines. So as you can see, the room that he's in is just very simple one-point perspective with everything just going back to that central vanishing point right here between his eyes. And of course, in the drawing itself, there's a lot more embellishment of it, but it's roughly all the same thing. Okay, now the arch here, let me just talk about that for a quick second, because all it is of course two verticals. I believe I'd measured them, got them right in the center and all that kind of good stuff. And then I just took that, of course, back to the vanishing point. Now, to find the distance between these ribs in the arch, well, that was pretty straightforward. Remember the railroad tracks and what we learned there? Okay, we keep using these lessons over and over again. So I just arbitrarily said, well, this is how wide one of those ribs is going to be. And then I've just got to find the center point. I believe it's somewhere right around here, you know, and go back to our vanishing point. Okay, and then just draw a line through it from the corner through the center and beyond, and that gives me my next measured sort of rib right here, right, the next section. And then I would just keep doing that same thing, and I would get the next section. And that's how I get that distance to be perfect in between the ribs. Okay, well, easy enough. So then the next thing was to make this arch. And that's not too tough. I mean, you just have to go across here, right? And, you know, here's my center point right here, where this is, you know, across from here, just like so, right? And then, you know, if you have a compass, great, but except that that would put a hole in your paper. So I'm just going to mark it here. I've got it on my end, and then I would just have to mark it every so often. Let's say here, and here, etc., so forth and so on. And that can really guide my hand to making a nice, smooth, circular arch, right? That's not too tough. Here, I'll just complete that real quick. Okay, and so now that I've got all these dots, I can just connect the dots. And of course, you're not drawing with a big old Sharpie. You're drawing really light, really light. So, you know, if you don't get it perfect, that's okay. You can erase, or you can be a little bit more sketchy in your movements. It's all right. You can do that. Okay, and so then for the inner arch, the only trick there is that you'd have to bring it down, right? So if this one is right across here, right? Well, then you'd need to bring it down to where the next rib was, which would be right about, well, it looks like right about here, right? So you'd have to go from that point. And do basically the same thing where I've got this, and I just keep going and making a little bunch of dots that I can follow, so forth and so on. Okay, and you see what a smooth circle that's given me. Now I'll just go ahead. I'm going to rough in these last ones, but it would be the same thing where you bring the dot down to the level right here, down to right about here, you know, and do the same thing, creating your dots. Okay, you can see already that the quality of my circle has gone down a little bit since I didn't follow my own advice. Okay, well that's all right. And then the rest is just, I made these ribs, probably just divided them up evenly. So let's say here, and let's say here. Okay, and so you can see that the ribs are really sort of heightening that sense of perspective. Another thing that's going to heighten it, of course, is your use of values, lighter values. You see how I've got the light coming out here, sort of framing him and shooting out, actual light rays coming out. And so this dark here with this light around in here, that's what's bringing that out and really starting to enhance the perspective. Another thing that you'll notice is that just like in other drawings, I've shaded darker in the corners. I've got it darker towards the back here. And so that really creates a contrast. And then, of course, all the little doodads, all the little details that, if you can see it right here, just help to bring up your drawing, right? Just little stuff. Okay, good enough. All right, well, so now the big one. Let's work on the dice. Okay, so the dice are just a bunch of cubes. There's actually 4 cubes because hopefully this translates, right? That I'm trying to put the dice in motion as if they are turning and spinning, right? And so it's just 1 cube, 2 cubes, 3 cubes, 4 cubes, and the way that I've shaded it hopefully brings that out. Okay, let's take a look. We're going to take a look at this part right here, this first one. Okay, so now just like I had done before, I'm going to start with a square, right? And so if I've got my square and I've measured it off, I've just decided sort of arbitrarily through my judgment that it's going to be about this size. I could go ahead and draw a square. Now, once again, I'm going to draw it with a big old Sharpie, but you would draw it nice and light, nice and light. And or like me, work out all your things, ahead of time so that all that first paper can be totally marked up, totally messy, totally dark, whatever, right? And then you could just trace. In later lessons, I'm going to teach you guys about using a light table, or about a grid system, or about projectors, all different ways of transferring a drawing. But here we go. So I've got that initial square, right? So then here for this one, I decided to use the vanishing point at the center right here and at the edge of the circle. You can see it coming down, right? And so then that's where the block is going to be turning this way. It would make a full turn by the time it got over here. All right, so I'm just going to take it off the edges and draw out. So starting here at the center, I'm not going to draw all these lines because it would get way too messy real quick. But draw it out here. You can see that there's where my first line is. Go ahead and do the second line right here. Just drawing them a little bit past where I think I'll need them, right? Not drawing them all the way back to the end. Then over here, I'll take it off this corner and come off of here. So once again, this vanishing point right here is where it intersects the circle. Okay, and so here we go. It's hit the corners, and so then I can just draw my sort of leading edge there. Something like that. And then for this one, I'm going to go back to here and here for my vanishing points and making it a cube. In other words, getting the depth. And you'll see that that's going to work out just fine for me. Because here, it's going to take it back from here, all the way back here. And that's going to give me my edge. And you'll see that it's coming forward a little bit, but also going back just a little bit. Okay, over here, we're going to get the same kind of deal, where it is coming forward a lot, but also going back a little bit. Okay, so here, just so it doesn't get too crazy confusing, I'm going to just darken in the lines that, that we can, so it doesn't cover up other lines. Okay, and I think I might be switching colors here, whatever, just to try and make it not too crazy for you. And here's the other dice, so I'm not going to go through that other dice. And here's the other dice, so I'm not going to go through that. You'll have to use your imagination to complete that line. Alrighty, but there it is, our first cube, and as you can see, it is just about as wide as what it would be if it was flat, and that's good because it is turning, and a lot narrower as it comes away, so it's looking good. It's a pretty believable cube. Maybe, in my judgment, I might have made that one a little bit, a little bit shorter, but not much, not much. It's pretty good. So then there's a second cube underneath it. And so then I'm using the same vanishing points, but I'm just going to move it forward a little bit. And in moving it forward, it's going to actually rotate in space. So let's see what happens with that. First, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw the square, just pushing it forward a little bit. So maybe move that square right here and here. So I've drawn my second square in red. Hopefully you guys can see that. And so I'm going to just take it from the corner to the vanishing point this way and this way. Back to the vanishing point here, but I won't go all the way. And here. Okay, where those lines intersect, that's my leading edge. I can use this same vanishing point here, keeping it nice and consistent. And that gives me my edge over here, which is perfect. It's just a little bit behind the square. And my leading edge is, of course, in front of the square. So that's all good. Okay, well, hopefully you can see here, I've really tried to darken in the borders of that cube right there. And you can see, how that worked. So one of the things that made this a lot easier to do was spinning this so that it was really nice and horizontal and easy for me to work on this sort of straight horizon line and just keep things sort of straight in my head. But, of course, then when you turn it, then we get this crazy, odd, tumbling angle over here. Okay, let's do these other two main dice. Okay, so let's make these dice up front. And as you can see, it's just two cubes, right, that are just spun a little bit. And so I'm going to show you how I did that. Now, first off, instead of continuing on with this paper here, which could get really confusing, you're going to end up with something that looks a lot like mine if you do that. And that's kind of a train wreck, right? I went ahead and I traced over it again so that we can start off with a fresh piece right here. And so the first thing to know with this one is that I used this central vanishing point as a reference, but I didn't use it as a vanishing point. What do I mean? Well, when I went to tumble it, what I did is I kept this vanishing point on the horizon line this way, but shifted things a little bit. And as you can see from the drawing, that worked out okay, because it still had a relationship to this vanishing point on this horizon line. Okay, so let's take a look at building that one. All right, so with this set of cubes right here, I started off in much the same way that I'd done in the lessons, where I took and I drew a square first. Well, with this one right here, it's going to go back to some of the older lessons where I draw a square in perspective and then I make a cube from that. Okay, so let's show you. So starting off, I just kind of figured like how big I wanted that. And, with this one here, I wanted it to be really big and, kind of in your face, right? So we're going to start right here. And I'm going to say like, okay, if I've got a horizontal line this way, then when these two come together, that's going to make a square. So I'll go from this vanishing point right here, because those are my right angle vanishing points. Makes the most sense, right? And we'll just draw down here. And then we're going to draw over to here. Okay, and you guys are wizards, so I don't have to continue that all the way back to the vanishing points for you, because you guys know that already. Okay, then from here, and to here. Okay, so then I want my central sort of leading edge to come down this way. But how far exactly, right? Where am I going to get that cube at? Well, what I did is I knew that if I had gone from these points up here, right? Let me bring this down a little bit so you guys can see that, right? So if I went from these points up here, which is what I might normally do if something was further up towards the center here, then what it would happen is it would get like really extreme. So instead, I just switched the vanishing points out to here, and that gave me a cube that was pretty good. I'm liking it. Just figuring that this was the square made by the edge of the circle. At least that's my justification. So if I bring that down all the way here, okay, I'll get a point right down here. And of course, coming from the other direction would give me that exact same point since everything is all lined up right there. Okay, so now I know how far to go down with this guy, right? So I could just make this leading edge right here. And I can go back to my vanishing points here. But wait a minute, how far do I go exactly, right? Because I wanted to put this into 3-point perspective, not just 2-point perspective, right? So let's take a look at that. Now, normally you would figure that my third point would be right down here. So if I do that, I'm going to get a perspective that's really extreme, if you can see that. And that's looking crazy. But wait a minute, remember what I was saying before, is that that third point is really more of an arc, right? Because here you're cutting through the sphere. Remember, this circle is really a sphere, right? But here, when you're going down, when you're using that third point, you're going around the outside of the sphere, so to speak, right? Like lines of longitude. So if I was to take my ruler and let's say bend it, oh, about like that, right? So it's going to be right there. It's going to give me a line that brings me closer to here. Now I could curve those, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to make those straight, but I'm going to use this curve that I've created as a reference. Okay. So, and in fact, once I've got that one on the one side, I can just bring it on over to the other side because we're keeping everything nice and horizontal. This away, something like this here. I think so. So we get then a third vanishing point, or a third, looks like a third vanishing point, that's a lot more believable, right? Because I took it off of that arc and then didn't go all the way to extreme. Anyways, so we've got our first cube. That was easy, right? It's kind of easier than those other ones. Those ones looked easy, but this one was really easy. So that gives me my first cube. Ignore this line right here. And so then my next thing is to spin it a little bit. All right, I'm going to go ahead and darken this one. I'm going to darken this one in this pink, I think, so that when I make my second one, I can do that one in the black. Hopefully that will show up even better than this pink. Okay, so now that we've got that one dice that kind of just comes down the center, what I did is I spun it a little bit, right, to give it that motion. And so I used the grid system that I had shown you in previous lessons, right? I've pre-drawn a little bit of a grid, but I'll walk you through it and make it a little bit darker so you can see it. I know I repeat myself so often, but if I was doing this on my own, I'd be drawing really lightly. Okay, but anyway, so I've got my square right here, right? And so this I can make into a larger square because as I spin it, I don't want it to get smaller. If anything, I want it to be slightly bigger than my first one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a flattened out square. So here, and I know how long these are because I'm just going to go back from my vanishing point here and draw this out. Here, I'll draw some of the lines going all the way back, but I won't draw all of them because, you don't need that. Okay, so we've got this here, and then we've got this one back here, of course. And so, just as this was a perfect square, this is also a perfect square. Okay, so then the next thing to do is to divide this into a grid. And how fine of a grid just depends on how much you want to spin it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start making a grid out of this. Just one line that way. We already got our line this way. So then we could go diagonally. So forth and so on until we get one level of grid. And I'll come back to you then. Okay, so here we have what I would call one level of division. So we've turned this one square into 4 on each side. 1, 2, 3, 4 on each side. And so I could do that, right? I could take a point here, and a point here, and a point here, and a point here, and I could connect those and make a square. But when I looked at that, it's like, okay, the problem with that is that this here is going to be such a sharp angle that I really will only get one side. It will be, it won't show me all nice three sides the way that I want to have it. So I'm going to have to subdivide this down a little bit. Now here's where I could guess. I could say like, okay, well, what's the center point between here and here? And get something like that there. Or I could continue to divide down the grid. In this case, instead of guessing, I'm going to go ahead and divide down the grid. Okay, so now I've subdivided the grid again, and that's going to give me some good points. So I'm going to put a point here, right? So moving over 1, and I'm going to put a point here. It's moving over 1, point here, moved over 1, and a point here, just moved over 1. So that worked out pretty well. Now, if you look really close, you would see there are some lines missing in my grid. The thing was that I didn't need to make them, and why make a line that you don't have to? Okay, so let's connect those dots and see what happens. Okay, so now hopefully you're seeing that that's the square that I got, and it's a beautiful square at an odd angle. Okay, so now how do I go ahead and make a cube out of that? Well, I just need to make a grid down here. And you might say to yourself, yeah, but it's in that crazy 3-point perspective. That was really not a big deal at all because I just took these points here, right, and came down from my vanishing point up here, and so that gave me my starting point. So I'll just go ahead and draw out as much of the grid as what we'll need. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've drawn this grid down here, and you'll see that there are even fewer lines than before because at this point all I needed was 3 points because one of them back here you wouldn't see anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and complete the square and let's see what happens. All right, so 1, 2, 3 points, and I can connect this up here I don't have to worry about finding the height of it because we've already got the height from the first cube. And there you go. Hopefully you can see that, a very believable cube. And that's how I got that second dice. Now, I know this stuff is a little bit confusing, but not really. And like I said before, if you're at this level, you're a wizard already. So, all right, looking pretty good, right? But you say like, wait a minute, Mr. Kuhn, there's something a little bit more going on there. Well, what it was is that when I looked at this, and I looked at it, and that's another good thing that you should do is, you should put your drawings up on the wall or whatever, look at them from a distance. And I said, you know what? We could do one better, right? And so what I did is, even after I had drawn the lines and everything for the table, as you kind of see them, let's see, maybe it's easier to see them in this one, right? Then what I did is I just said like, oh, okay, what about if we turned it again just a little bit and ghosted in some new lines. So you have the one very solid border for the table, but then there's another one that's a little bit lighter, right? I just got it just by turning it a little bit this way. The markings that are down on the craps table, there's one that's a little bit more solid going this way, right, with this, and then just turned it, and everything going back to the vanishing points. Same thing down here to keep things consistent. Okay, and so that's how I got to be really sort of just, that crazy sort of blurry motion effect. Okay, and so then comes the artistry, right? Because we've put together a nice little structure like this, but then how do we turn it into, hopefully, what's a beautiful drawing, right? And so, okay. So then from there, I don't have to worry about this thing anymore at all. But I just really start thinking about my values. As I already pointed out here, drawing darker in the corners, thinking about where you have your contrast of light versus dark, how light is going to draw you into that center and everything dark shooting in around it, right? All to draw you in there. Art, I've heard it says, is a contrast of darks and lights. So you've got dark to light, dark to light, dark to light, dark to light, like that. And that's how you get that dramatic sort of shading, dark to light, right? Use your mediums, okay? And then how did I get this in here? Well, basically, it was just drawing one dice, of a certain level, maybe sort of everything a little bit more medium, and then drawing the other one. And where those things intersected, kind of like a Venn diagram, that's where they would tend to get a little bit darker. Also bring out details that you would see more, lining up the dots. So like if you were to look at this, you'd say like, okay, we've got one set of dots that clearly goes here, here, and here, right? And I drew out those dots. And then I said, okay, I've got another set of dots that goes from here to here to here. Same thing down here, where you've got a set of dots that clearly is going here to here, and another one that's going here to here, so forth and so on. Now, when I was shading, I did try and say like, well, okay, one of these is going to be the more dominant. And you can really kind of see that, I believe, with this one is definitely more dominant. And with this one, maybe this one that's coming at an angle, because that's, it's supposed to be spinning, coming towards you, that this one is more dominant. And it's a function really of how I shaded the spots on the dice more than anything else. So, just give it a go. You've got mine to look at. And what's more is, my gosh, every week you should do one drawing from direct observation, right? Because looking at one of my drawings, one of my exercises is good, but looking at something real Nothing else. Look at your own hand and draw that, right? Something real, because something real is always perfect. And that's where you should start. So I'm so glad that you took this journey with me. If you've made it this far, you are a true wizard, and I applaud you. And I look forward to what we learn next.